A single dad and war veteran appears in court on a minor custody issue, only to witness a young woman being manhandled and attacked by corrupt cops inside the courtroom. His instincts as both a protector and father kick in, drawing on his military training and courage. The veteran intervenes, protecting the woman and exposing the brutality in front of shocked citizens. As the woman recovers, her true identity is revealed. She's an undercover investigator gathering evidence of judicial corruption. The judge's mask begins to crack. With the courtroom in uproar, she assumes the judge's seat, armed with proof of systemic corruption, flipping the balance of power. The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and stale coffee, a mixture that always made James Carter feel like the air itself carried judgment, as if every breath inside was weighted by decades of broken promises and misplaced authority. And as he sat on the hard wooden bench in the back row, waiting for his name to be called in a custody hearing that had already drained too much of his soul, he could feel that same heaviness pressing down on him again. James was a single dad, a veteran of 2 wars, a man whose body carried scars both visible and hidden, and though he had faced bullets, explosions, and the unrelenting desert heat of combat zones, nothing had ever felt as exhausting or unforgiving as these constant battles in court just to be with his daughter Emily. She was his anchor, his reason, the light that had kept him alive through endless deployments and sleepless nights. And now, at only 10 years old, she was caught in a system that didn't care about love or sacrifice, only about paperwork, procedures, and power. He rubbed his hands together, the calluses on his palms reminding him of the rifles he once carried. The tools of survival that seemed worlds away from this courtroom where survival meant patience and silence. And yet, as he sat there, his mind wandered back to Emily's laugh, her smile, her little hand gripping his when she didn't want him to leave for duty. And that memory steadied him, kept him from sinking into the frustration that threatened to boil over. The judge, a stern man named Reynolds, presided over the cases with the kind of cold efficiency James had come to expect. His voice sharp like a blade, his gavel cracking down as though each strike was meant not to bring order but to silence humanity. Around James, the benches creaked with the nervous shifting of other families, mothers wringing their hands, fathers staring at the floor, children trying to stay still while the weight of adult struggles played out around them. He had seen fear before, the kind that freezes a man in the middle of combat, and he saw it here too. In the way no one dared raise their eyes when a ruling felt unfair, in the way whispers died quickly under the gaze of authority. It was during this suffocating stillness that the doors at the back of the courtroom opened with a force that cut through the monotony, and in walked a young woman, no older than 28, clutching a folder tightly to her chest, her posture stiff but her eyes burning with something that immediately caught James's attention. She walked with purpose, not arrogance, but with the kind of determination that suggested she knew she was walking into a fight bigger than herself. And as she reached the clerk's desk and handed over her papers, James leaned forward slightly, curiosity mixing with an instinct he had honed in war zone, as if the ability to read people, to sense when something was about to happen. The clerk called her case, and she stepped to the front, her voice steady though tinged with emotion as she explained that she was contesting an unlawful fine, that she had evidence of harassment and misconduct. Her words rang with truth, but Judge Reynolds barely looked up, his hand waving dismissively as though she were nothing more than an inconvenience clogging up his docket, and with chilling indifference, he cut her off, his voice booming through the courtroom. "Enough. Your case is dismissed. Officers, escort her out." The words landed like a verdict that had been written before she ever entered, and James felt his stomach twist. A familiar anger rising in him, the same anger he had felt when orders from faraway commanders ignored the reality of the ground, when lives were dismissed with the stroke of a pen. But the young woman did not leave. Instead, her voice rose, trembling but unbroken, declaring that she had evidence, that her rights were being trampled, that she would not be silenced. The tension in the room tightened like a drawn bowstring as 2 uniformed officers moved toward her, their boots echoing against the polished floor, the sound far too loud in the heavy silence. James's jaw clenched as he watched them close in, their movements less about escorting and more about intimidation, and when they grabbed her arms roughly, twisting them behind her back with unnecessary force, he felt his chest tighten, his fists balling at his sides. Her cry of pain cut through the air, raw and desperate, and when her folder slipped from her grasp, papers scattering like fallen leaves across the courtroom floor, James knew in his bones that something was deeply wrong. The officers didn't see a person, they saw an obstacle to be removed, and as they shoved her against the wooden railing, her face contorting in agony, the silence of the room became unbearable. Around him, people averted their eyes, pretending not to see, too afraid to stand against authority, their fear a chain that kept them seated. But James had lived too long with the memory of silence costing lives, of hesitation letting injustice grow unchecked. His heart pounded like it had in firefights, adrenaline surging through him, his body remembering before his mind could rationalize, and though he told himself he had to stay out of it, that he had Emily to think of, when he heard the woman's sharp cry as her shoulder was wrenched, it was like hearing the scream of a civilian caught in crossfire, and he knew he couldn't stay seated. Slowly but with an authority that demanded attention, James rose from the bench. It wasn't a dramatic gesture, no shouting, no fists raised, just the quiet but undeniable presence of a man who had faced death and refused to bow. The officers glanced at him, their grips tightening on the woman, but James moved with the kind of calm certainty that made even trained men hesitate. His voice, deep and steady, rolled through the room. "That's enough." The words were not loud, but they carried a weight that silenced even the whispers. The officers paused, unsure, sensing in the square of his shoulders and the steadiness of his gaze that he was not just another bystander. James stepped closer, his eyes locked on the officer twisting the woman's wrist, and with precise control, he placed his hand on the man's, applying subtle but effective pressure that forced the grip to loosen without escalating into violence. "She's not resisting," he said firmly. "There's no need for this." His voice carried authority, not from a badge but from a lifetime of commanding respect in situations where lives were on the line. The woman gasped as her arm was released, stumbling slightly but catching herself, her wide eyes turning to him with a mixture of shock and gratitude. For the first time, she wasn't alone. But Judge Reynolds slammed his gavel, his voice thunderous with rage. "Sit down, Mr. Carter. You will not interfere with court officers." James didn't look at him. His eyes never left the officers, his stance a silent warning that if they tried again, they would find themselves matched against someone who knew how to end a fight before it began. The judge's fury filled the room, but something else was happening. Whispers rose from the benches, phones discreetly lifted to record. People dared to look up, to witness, to document. The spell of silence was breaking. The woman, clutching her folder to her chest with trembling hands, stood straighter now, her voice shaky but defiant. "No, Your Honor. This man just defended me when your court allowed abuse." Her words cut through the air like a blade of light in a dark room, and for the first time, the courtroom was alive not with fear but with murmurs of agreement, of courage awakening. James bent down, gathering the papers that had scattered across the floor, each page carrying words she had fought to bring into this room, and he placed them gently back into her hands, his voice low, almost a whisper meant only for her. "You're safe now." She clutched the papers tightly, her breath ragged but her eyes burning with new resolve. The judge's face flushed crimson, his gavel striking again and again, but the authority he clung to was crumbling as the crowd began to murmur louder. As cameras captured the truth unfolding before them, James stood unmoving, calm in the storm, ready for whatever came next, knowing that by standing he had crossed a line, but also knowing he could never have lived with himself if he had stayed seated. He didn't yet know who this woman was or why her presence carried such weight, but in that moment none of that mattered. What mattered was that he had refused to let silence win, that he had done what he had always done, to protect those who could not protect themselves. In that instant, as the woman straightened, her voice rising above the chaos to challenge the authority that had tried to crush her, James felt something stir deep within him, something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of purpose, of belonging to a fight that mattered not just for him, not just for Emily, but for everyone who had ever been silenced by power. He had no way of knowing that within seconds, everything would shift again, that the woman he had just defended would take a seat no one expected her to claim. But for now, as the courtroom trembled under the weight of truth, James Carter knew one thing with absolute certainty: Silence had been broken, and justice would no longer wait quietly in the shadows.